this many tons, that's the beginning of the graph, are things that would pay to do anyways. They're worth doing anyways because they're going to generate you a return anyways. We can look at these in the specific graph, but a lot of times this is efficiency stuff. So, we did a model, and it's in the textbook, like, improving insulation of homes, changing out light bulbs, changing to LED light bulbs. It pays for people to do that. Solar hot water, heating your swimming pool with a solar panel instead of natural gas. It pays you to do that. People don't do that because it costs a bunch. $30 for a light bulb? No way, right? But it would pay off to buy the $30 light bulb. Insulating your home, buying all new windows, $20,000 to replace all the windows in my home. I don't have $20,000, but it would pay off in terms of long term. So all of these activities down here, they're going to pay off without a positive price for carbon. Here's the price of carbon is above 0, and we hit a whole bunch of activities. Remember, the width of these activities matters, so it's really skinny activity. I mean, it's not going to get us as far towards our goal as a wider activity. And then here we get to some of the big power generation things that we've already talked about. The big concentrating solar or big photovoltaic farms. And out here is going to be this thing with a carbon sequestration where we do it at the utility scale. There's definitely carbon sequestration things that sort of happen in the middle. That's changing pasture lands and forest lands and sort of like the way we manage big extensions of land, replanting tropical forests, like having a tropical forest growing cattle, really low rates of cattle, and cattle produce a lot of methane. If you could switch that back to forests that are grown, sustainably for wood, that's somewhere in the middle here. It's worth subsidizing because it's a low-cost way to completely change the amount of carbon. All right, so hopefully that's motivated. Does this make sense, this kind of graph? So we can look at the one. So there was a really big report by McKinsey Consulting, who's sort of the top global consultancy, and they did this for the world. Like, what can we do to come in line with reducing our carbon in the world? So we can look at some of these activities. So here are the LED light bulbs ones, switching to LED light bulbs in your house. That's the one that has the greatest negative price. It pays the most. Insulation. There's some stuff on motors, nutrient management. So we way over-fertilize and do really industrial ways of fertilizing our soils. We don't manage the nutrient in our soils. We just throw a whole bunch of carbon-intensive nitrogen onto our soils. Here where we got residential, a whole bunch of residential stuff, residential electronics, residential appliances, residential HVAC. So there's still a whole bunch of stuff like the way people manage their homes. Insulation, hybrid cars are up here, stuff about trash, biofuels. Interesting, rice paddies get their own one. So the way rice paddies produce a ton of CO2 when they're flooded. There's an anaerobic composting going on. So if you change just the way that you flooded rice paddies, that would be different. Industrial efficiency improvements. So there's a whole bunch that we could do before we get to the price of 0 that would reduce, so the distance here, we would reduce this much carbon if we could just do the things that already paid to do them. And then we pass the price of 0, we're getting to the positive price of carbon here. This is euros per ton. So how much is 50 euros? Anybody? We got the European here. Where is she? She's asleep. How much is 50 euros? Yeah. It's like $75, $80? Less? All right, say this is $65 or $70 or something. Euros. I did it wrong. Euros. All right, so in between, we have a whole bunch of the stuff that I was talking about. That's pastures, land reforestation, forest reforestation, soil, so grasslands. We have a whole chance of doing a whole bunch of stuff that's not industrial. It's not power plants. It's not cars. It's changing how we manage pastures and forests and stuff. Then at the higher prices, we get to a bunch of the stuff that we talked about in this class. Solar concentrating, solar photovoltaics are ones that we talked about, wind. And then these top ones have the CCS in them, right? So remember what that is. That's the carbon sequestration and storage. So that's where we're going to capture the carbon that's coming out of the power plant and stick it in a salt mine or something. This is, if we built a new plant, it's going to be cheaper than if we try and capture the carbon on our existing plants. We don't actually know how to do this, but we're thinking about it. We're getting close to it. So we have this question of like how much, what pathway we're going to be on is how we're going to pick this ending line, like how much abatement do we need to get to, right? And from that, we can read these different prices off. So if the price per carbon was 40 euros per ton, we would get through these wind ones, but we wouldn't get up to the carbon sequestration ones, right? So we need to get this global price up to some level. That whole bunch of these activities will start to happen. And people that want to invest in these will see that their things are going to be competitive and that the fossil fuels are going to be less and less competitive. So there's a whole bunch of different ways to do this marginal abatement curve. This was sort of one of the big first ones that got this discussion going on a global level. And then they could relate to, so here's our emissions per year, right? And so these are relating, this is the tons per year. That's related to these tons per year down here, right? So again, we have these sort of pathways. We're here now, but when we do the report, we're here. And we have some sort of pathways if we do nothing. If we want to get on a pathway, this is for 550 parts per million. We want to stabilize the planet at 550. Remember, we're at 400 now, right? So in this gray, we're going to get to 400 and stabilize at 400. This is the most ambitious one. Probably stabilizing at 500 or 510 are these other pathways. And they can link these pathways going towards 2030 to what the price per ton would be, right? 60 euros per ton, 60 to 100 euros per ton. So let's say this is $75, $80, something like that. And this is greater than $80 per ton. And again, this is global, so this means everybody on the planet needs to face an $80 per ton, which is a really high price to put on all fossil energy use on the planet. So we're hoping to be in one of these if we can get this price per ton to come into play. And then this is another way to develop it. This is business as usual, least common denominator. This is developed world in the lead. This is sort of where we're at right now. Europe's going to start it out, and they're going to start internalizing prices. California's going to be next. Australia's going to come in, but it's not going to necessarily be global. And then this is some sectors it works for, other sectors it doesn't work for, and we can talk about that. Which sectors are most likely to internalize the price for carbon? Some are, some aren't. So if we get to here, this is global action. This is all countries doing it, right? So, and a big one is, the China and India. What's their pathway going to be? They're the ones whose fossil fuel growth is growing the fastest. So what's the turning the corner for China and India? And this is, behavior change. Everybody's eating differently, transporting differently, living in different, this is like the world is structured differently. All right, so we can do abatement curves for the world, and then we can do abatement curves for the United States, and we can have abatement curves for California. Different people can put them in play, and they're going to have a whole bunch of different assumptions in them, right? So again, let's just look at this US one. This is sort of like going along with the McKinsey analysis they're doing as well, but this is taking a whole bunch of studies on what's doable. Again, here's like LED lighting, commercial electronics, building efficiency, right? This is stuff that we already talked about. Then there's fuel efficiency, so fuel economies in here. And then we get to stuff about forests and rangelands in here. Then we get to these renewables that we're building now, photovoltaics and wind. And then we get to some of the more fossil fuels with carbon sequestration. In this graph, we have this point here that if a lot of people are talking about $50 per ton. So a lot of times that's talked about as like, what would it take to get to $50 per ton? What would we get if we had $50 per ton? So this, if you had $50 a ton, you would have this much abatement. And some of the carbon sequestration would happen. New plants that get built would have carbon sequestration, but it's probably hard to put carbon sequestration on existing plants. Then I found a curve for California, but I thought this was really interesting. It's not from the McKinsey report, it's from a different report, and they've color-coded the activities in terms of how responsive they are to prices. So different activities are going to have different elasticities of how much they're going to respond to a price per ton, right? And we can think about stuff that we've already talked about in this class. So I can't read all these, it's like weird font here, but so fuel, here's a big one, right? Fuel economy standards. We don't do it with price per ton. We do it with the federal government setting manufacturer requirements. And I showed this back in lecture 4 or 5. Like, there's a table of new cars that are sold and what sort of emissions they're allowed to have. And that's for emissions in California, and then there's federal standards on miles per gallon they're required to have. So we don't do requirements on insulating buildings and changing light bulbs. Those are also done by state requirements. A lot of this is this, in the textbook it's called command and control versus market-based instruments. So when we look at this marginal cost of abatement and do it on price per carbon, we're thinking mostly market-based. But there's a whole bunch of these that we're going to get through more command and control type of thing, best technology standards we've talked about. So going up here into these, whether we build new power plants on different types of technologies, that's totally going to be pricing in a price of carbon. But interestingly, a lot of these that are the ones that pay to do them anyways, we do them more with regulations, trying to encourage people. All new buildings should have this insulation level. All new buildings should have this lighting or this type of heater. ENERGY STAR appliances, right? So people are buying their appliance in the store, not thinking about the lifetime cost of energy. They're not thinking about the price of carbon of their new washing machine. So we're going to require that everything in the store be a certain level of efficient. It's really, I thought this graph was really interesting because we need to use a whole bunch of different policy instruments to get out to California's goals. We need a high price per carbon, but we need a whole bunch of things in places where people aren't going to see the price per carbon on their consumption choices. So we can just go back through our Chapter 12 knowledge. We need to come up with this dollar per ton emitted, right? We're thinking this is about $50 per ton. The McKinsey report, if we wanted to save the planet and get on a pathway, was $80 per ton. So far in carbon markets, they've gotten up to $10 per ton. On voluntary markets, it's gone between 1 to 5 at the high 10. I'll show you some more data on this later. So we have places that people are paying $1 to $5 to $10 per ton now, today. There's carbon markets in Europe, there's carbon markets in Chicago, and there's carbon markets in Sacramento where people are selling for cap and trade. We have different proposals on how to get there, right? So when we can do our Econ 1 environmental economics on whether it should be cap and trade or carbon tax, we have different reasons to favor the different ones. And we have graphs that we can draw for cap and trade and carbon tax. There's been a whole bunch of markets, and I'll talk about this for these numbers here, that have been on voluntary payments. Just getting the market started through getting people to make voluntary payments. You guys have probably seen this, like a low bumper sticker on the car. This car's offsets have been purchased, or you get on the plane, and sometimes on the plane says, would you like to purchase an offset for your plane travel? You read about people voluntarily buying to mitigate their carbon. And then we have a whole bunch of things versus when we are dealing with the markets we have now that are fossil fuel dependent, and how do we set up future markets that are like not based on fossil fuels, and are they going to look different, and they're going to have different prices in them. All right, so carbon tax, let's just go back to where we already have been, and we can do some sort of price, dollars per ton, and tons of carbon, right? There's 2 different ways that we did this already. So here's the graph that we just started to look at, marginal cost of abatement. We looked at this in terms of the fossil fuel sector versus the transportation sector. So just remember that we already know how to do this. So here would be abatement here. You would get to some efficient point. So here's this. Let's say this is the tax. This is the carbon tax. And you would have some pollution here, emission. Right? So if there is a carbon tax, it's going to go across and hit its marginal cost of abatement. At some level below that, it pays more for the company to figure out how to clean up than paying the tax. If we go past the tax, it costs too much for them to clean up. There are some net benefits up here for them to pollute more. And you're going to require them to pay the tax times the quantity that they still emit. Right? So there's still going to be some big chunk of tax down there. Right? So we did this chapter sort of 10, 11, 12. We did this. We can think about this being in a whole bunch of different sectors. Though. We can have it just for one firm. General Motors, Chevron. Right? Chevron's going to have to pay for carbon. Right now in California, they're going to have to pay $10 in 2014 per ton of carbon. Chevron has huge refineries and sells tons of gasoline, right? So they're down here now, and they're buying these permits for a certain amount of abatement that they have to do. We hope that we could get it up to $50 a ton, and Chevron would clean up this much more, so California can meet its goals. We could look at it in terms of entire sectors, like we have the transportation sector or the electricity sector. And so there's going to be different firms, and there's going to be light trucks and diesel trucks and trucks at the port and trains, or we could have different types of power plants, old power plants, coal power plants, natural gas power plants that are all going to have different abilities to clean up. We're going to have different countries having different abilities to clean up if we want to look across countries, like in the Kyoto Protocol kind of thing. I just want to, let me just go away. I need to erase all key. We also did this in the problem set with net benefits, in a marginal benefits curve, right? So that was something like this. So I'm just going to reverse these here. So this is something we solved in the homework 4. We have decreasing benefits. They're going to pollute till benefits equal 0. If we put a tax on there, it's going to have the effect of shifting this line down, right? It basically has the effect of shifting the line down to the pollute till it's 0. But we can just put it on up here, and they're going to now pollute on this type of curve that we did in the homework. We're going to pollute to here, and they're going to abate to here, right? There's still some value. There's some net benefits to the firm above the price that they're going to have to pay. This becomes the tax down here. Just other ways to think about it. So up here, their output per ton of CO2 is higher than $50. They're still creating value, even though they're paying the tax. They're going to get to a point here at which the value of the next unit of output is equal to $50. That's where they're going to stop production, and they're going to clean up or produce less for the rest of it. So same thing, 2 different ways. Some of the big, well, I'll go into, and we can talk about cap and trade, and we can talk about which one it is. So we had cap and trade before. Usually, the way we motivate this is we say this is when we do. There's a fixed quantity that we need to clean up in this sector, and we're going to have 2 abatement curves. So we'll start with marginal cost per abatement. So let's say this is number 1, this is number 2. They're both in dollars per ton of CO2. Here we have quantity of CO2 abated, CO. That's all we call it CO2e, CO2 equivalent, because methane is 40 times what CO2 is. So we're going to bundle it all to be a CO2 thing. So this is marginal cost of abatement of firm 1. And then coming from this side, we have marginal cost of abatement of firm 2, or sector 2. In the book, it was transportation versus power plants. There's going to be some efficient point. If this quantity total here is the total amount that we want to abate, there's going to be some efficient point that allocates it between the 2 sectors. That's going to correspond to a price, dollars per ton, right? So if we think we want to pick our abatement amount, that it's going to be $50 that's going to get that done in the short term. We can importantly have different allocations. If we start with initial allocation here, and say this is our efficient point, they can trade. So this is a lower marginal cost to abate. This is a higher marginal cost to abate. This person can abate some more, and this person can abate some less, and they're going to trade their permits to get to this point. There's going to be some price in here around $50 a ton that's going to be equal for them. And in this one, this is the abatement that's done by firm 1, and this is the abatement that's done by firm 2, right? They're going to trade. We're just going to have to set some allocation. They're going to know what their cost of abatement are. They're going to figure out what this equilibrium price is. And we do this in this class for 2 sectors, but what's important when we think about this is we're going to go across all sectors. It's going to be people making concrete. It's going to be people making oil. It's going to be people, people refining oil. It's going to be people making power. It's going to be people, all different sectors are going to be involved in here. So we'll do it simply for 2 sectors, but we sort of invisibly want to think this could work for infinity different sectors. So I just want to, again, just do that. We know this a different way with marginal benefits curves. So that just a little bit of review for the final, I guess. Come on, go away. So the other was if you have a marginal benefits curve for firm 1, it's somehow downward sloping instead of upward sloping. You have a marginal benefits curve for firm 2. This is, again, back to problem set 4. Marginal benefits curve for firm 2, right? This is where they're actually emitting this amount. Firm 1, emission. So the axes are just reduced. Firm 1, abatement. You still have this idea of an efficient point. You have this idea if you're off the allocation, there's still some net benefit up here that's worth buying the right to get out to that point. In this one, if the initial allocation was here, there's some buying from firm 1. Firm 1 is going to buy from firm 2 to get to the efficient point because there's some more corner of net benefit that they can get to that they're willing to pay more down here than down here. There's some big differences here in terms of if we look at the revenue for the government, it's like what's the government's role here to do something about it? So the government in the tax case has a huge box, a huge tax box. The total amount of pollution times $50 per ton. So this is going to be billions of dollars in any country and trillions of dollars globally. You would have